Our first agenda item is going to be the consent agenda. Does anyone
Recording
want to...
in progress.
Oh, all right. Does anyone want to pull anything out?
Yeah, I request that we pull out item B, the operating expenses out from the consent agenda.
Okay, and that's been removed.
I'll make a motion to accept consent agenda with the amendment of pulling out subsection B.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
Aye.
Okay, the consent agenda with the exception of item B is approved. Now we can move down to public comment.
Yes, if anybody would like to speak, if you'll just raise your hand so I can see that in the chat box, and then I will let you in. I know we have Mr. Anderson here. Okay, I'm going to unmute Mr. Anderson. Okay, Mr. Anderson, can you hear us, sir?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
That's good. Not much that I want to comment on. I was a little confused from the executive director report, but I figured it out that item 5A must be including the ask from Circuit of the Northwest for additional funding for their amphitheater. Also, I was curious, I didn't see a agenda item on your move to Poulsbo. Is that complete, or should it have a progress report provided? And then third thing I want to mention has to do with a new development that is beginning planning with developers who bought the old Silverdale Elementary School in Old Town Silverdale. It's going to include in their thoughts right now, certainly, restoration of Strawberry Creek, and they're going to call their development so far at this point, Strawberry Creek Village. I can imagine that it might be, or some element of it might be, a good thing for Public Facilities District funding in a few years if you then begin another round of project submissions to weigh and consider funding. So just wanted to make that a project that's starting to brew. Wanted to make you aware of it in case you hadn't heard of that anywhere. It's stemming from a recent purchase and sale agreement between the Central Kitsap School District and a set of entities, including Waterman Mitigation Partners and the JWJ Group in Silverdale. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Russ, can you get one question about the move?
Sure. Yeah, so the move will be next week. The move will be next week, August 3rd is when the movers come. So I'll be, after this meeting, I'll start packing us up and getting us moved.
Okay, any additional?
I do not see any other hands. Okay. I believe we are ready for the facilities report.
Yes.
So I will bring in, let me get to that real quick. I'll bring in our speakers for tonight. I want to get their presentation up here. There we go. And I will shrink that down. Okay, so I'm letting in Mrs. Carla Botten from the City of Bremerton and Mr. Dan Schoonmaker. Also, I'm sorry, from the City of Poulsbo, and Mr. Dan Schoonmaker from the City of Poulsbo. So I promoted both of them to panelists. So Ms. Botten and Mr. Schoonmaker, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Russ. Yes.
Okay, great. So let me shrink down your presentation size so everybody can see it.
Fantastic.
Okay, go ahead. I'll advance for you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, PFD board. Dan and I are pleased to be here again after a couple months to give you an update on the Poulsbo Event and Recreation Center feasibility study. We have some updates for you from our last meeting in March. Go ahead and move to the next screen. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So tonight we're going to present the activity on the PERC from March to through this month through July. This will include, we'll detail a new phased approach for the PERC project, a revised site plan, update on a targeted market analysis that is underway, and then next steps. So next slide. Great. So this is a slide that we've been showing you for the last couple progress reports. It just shows the flow of our tasks under the ILA and the development of the feasibility study. So we are in between 3 and 4 right now, finalizing, hopefully, to be finalizing our site and building design here in the next 60 to 90 days. So next screen. So you might recall from our March update that we had been considering some revisions to the PERC approach from what we presented to what we had presented to you in November. And that was based on, or it might have been in October, but in the fall of 2021, we received feedback from our November 9th, 2021 steering committee meeting from a number of steering committee members, as well as the new PFD director. And we took some time towards the end of the year, as well as in January, to meet with the folks who provided that feedback at the meeting, also out from outside of the meeting, to hear what they had to say about the direction that the PERC was going. You also might recall from our March meeting is that we were attempting to acquire about approximately 9 acres adjacent to the PERC project in order to site all of the facilities and the amenities that we were trying to coordinate as part of the PERC project. That was an unsuccessful attempt. The property owner had received a offer from a developer that the city could not match, so they have moved forward with the developer of that property. So the city staff, Dan and I, sat back and we talked about the feedback we received, as well as some feedback we received from City Council about trying to do doing a phased approach. And we will be presenting tonight a 3-phased approach for the PERC project, where each phase can be a standalone project. So next slide, please. So the first phase will be multi-use tournament fields, and this will be 2 turfed and lighted tournament fields with outdoor recreational amenities, picnic shelters, and parking, and that will be located at the current PERC site. Now, if adjacent land can be acquired, and they're not necessarily the property that the city had attempted to purchase, but there is still a potential for additional land to the east of the PERC site, either through Olympic College or private property owner. We're not pursuing either one of those right now, but just is that in the future, if additional land can be acquired or a joint use agreement with Olympic College or within a totally different site in the city of Poulsbo, phases 2 and 3 would then move forward. Now, phase 2 would be an event and recreation center. This would be a center with an indoor recreation basketball court, as well as other fitness pieces, but it would also have meeting classrooms for events and continued coordination with Olympic College and Western Washington University for to coordinate with what their students' needs might be for space. So that would be phase 2. And then a phase 3 would be a outdoor recreation pool. Now you might recall from the presentation we gave of the site plan in fall and in March that we were attempting to have the PERC be a event center with meeting spaces and an outdoor pool with no fields. This has changed. And if you want to move to the next slide, we'll give you a revised site plan. So what we're proposing, we went, again, based on the feedback we received from a number of people, that fields are an important, if not essential, component to the PERC. We went back to our architect consultant and said phase 1 is tournament fields with outdoor recreation elements. There's 2 lighted and turfed multi-use fields. So we have, as you can see on the drawing, an east-west facing upper field and a north-south oriented lower field. The task for the architect and the landscape architect was to try to incorporate as many elements from the previous site plan as we could while still siting 2 fields. So we have the Pacific Northwest inspired playground, which is located between the 2 fields. This is also taking advantage of the grade change, where a kind of a naturally tiered amphitheater will be graded into the site plan or into the site so that there could be not seating. It's also sited there so that families could, with younger children, could have a place to bring their kids while soccer tournaments or lacrosse tournaments are happening at the fields, as well as just normal, daily, weekly play at the fields. There's picnic shelters. They have programmed in actually 5 different picnic shelters to support tournaments. They can also provide an additional rental revenue source. And then the recreational amenities would be, we really wanted to try to keep the sports courts that were in the previous site plan located at the southern portion of the site plan. And so they were able to program in 4 pickleball courts and 1 full-size outdoor basketball court. Trails that are connecting that site to the north, or to the Olympic College Western Washington campus to the north, as well as to the existing trail system at College Marketplace, was always part of the plan. So that still remains to be on the western side of the property. And then we have still managed to have 50 parking spaces on site, and a little small plaza, entry plaza, kind of where that arrow in the middle of it is. There's an entry plaza that serves as ADA access, as well as entry into kind of the center of it where there's going to be concessions, bathroom, picnic shelters, again, the playground, and then access to both fields. Go ahead, next slide. So again, speaking to the phase 1 tournament fields, in 2021, you may recall our report out on the market analysis, which is again part of the ILA tasks that we've been doing for the PERC feasibility study. And PERC Consulting concluded that the 4 fields in Poulsbo, so the 2 at the PERC and 2 in the Strawberry Fields, which is up by the school campus, were not competitive in the regional or state soccer tournament market. It was just too few. Their conclusion was you need a minimum of 6 fields in order to be marketable in the tournament, or at least in the soccer tournament field. And so taking a look at, again, fields were our priority now. We wanted to make that a priority. How can we make this marketable? We reached out to Central Kitsap School District Facilities Manager and Athletic Director and asked if they would be interested in partnering with the city in marketing a package of fields that would be in Poulsbo and Silverdale. So a 15-minute driving radius between Poulsbo and Silverdale. And they agreed and said we would like to have a agreement with the city to market all of our fields together for regional and state tournaments. So CK School District has 7 fields available, and the way it's available is over long holidays, weekends, vacation times, and their fields can support soccer, lacrosse, and football tournaments. So then we went back to PERC Consulting and asked them to conduct target marketed analysis to some of the same people they talked about, asked in 2021 to say, okay, if we had up to we had more fields, so 11 fields available within, again, a 15-minute driving radius, how does that change your your consideration for scheduling tournaments? And it improved it greatly, and said that the feedback we received from PERC is that there is marketability of these fields, and that it does result in a feasible tournament destination and their estimation is for 2 to 3 tournaments per year. So, and that is for the regional and state tournaments. There's certainly the potential for more tournaments at the local level within Kitsap County itself. We did not test that market. We wanted to test at this point the regional and state marketability. So next slide. So again, talk about phase 1, our tournament fields, they are market feasible. They provide the necessary economic development test under the state PFD requirements. It also moves the PERC project forward while allowing time for the larger components to continue to be planned. The outdoor recreation elements that we have provide most of the desired elements, outdoor elements that were identified in the community survey that we did in the fall of 2020. And of course, combined, we promote wellness, provides an active community green space with multiple activities that can serve all ages. And together, this will result in a public facility that's a blend of a regional draw while serving the Poulsbo and North Kitsap community. So next slide. So here is our next steps, our timeline for the rest of the year. Rest of this month in August, we'll be finalizing the revised site plan that we've actually unveiled it to you guys first. We'll be getting a cost estimate from our architect and our landscape architect. We'll be briefing the city, Dan and I will brief the city council in August. We'll update our webpage with this new revised site plan. We'll reconvene the community steering committee to, again, discuss the process, the journey the PERC has taken and where we're at with a phased approach for phase 1. We'll be finalizing the feasibility study. So there's still 2 pieces left to develop, the management plan and then the financial strategy. City council resolution, we are tagging for November, and then we will present the feasibility study to the PFD board. We were scheduled to do a status update on your December 12th meeting, and we will be at that meeting presenting our final feasibility study to you. So that concludes our presentation. Russ, if you might want to move it back to the site plan screen in case folks had specific questions about the site plan. And Dan and I are here happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you. Do you any questions from the board?
So Carla, the initial finding that it wasn't feasible didn't have anything to do with the condition of the strawberry fields. It was strictly a number of fields issue.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
And Director Jagodinski has a question.
Carla, I love the design, and I love the idea of tournament fields and the partnership with CK is fantastic because I'm a parent who drives all over the place, and I stay a couple of nights in hotels, and I spend a lot of money on eating in different places and staying in those communities. And so to draw people here to do the same thing is a fantastic thing. And so, and hopefully we won't have to travel so far too, for some of our tournaments. So I really like that. I have a question on the sport court being down at the south end. You had mentioned that there were reasons why you wanted to do that. My thought when I first saw it was if you simply put that next to the Northwest Play amphitheater seating piece and push that lower field towards the street, you would create a place where you could put the stage or the chairs. It says, amphitheater seating or whatever, that might be a better surface than a tournament field for putting something on, depending on what plans you had for it. So just curious as
Mhm.
to the thoughts that went into putting it down on the bottom rather kind of in the middle, which might give more space even around the play area while different things are going on.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it is something that we intentionally thought about. And so, but you raised some good some good ideas. The sports courts were originally programmed down there in the site plan from 2021, and there was two thinking about it. One was that it has access from the street, and so what we wanted to make sure these courts were drivable, so that we could have art and craft kind of outdoor fairs, and they could be sited on there. Perhaps even the farmers market might want to locate there, or come visit the PERC site. It would also be a place where you could put a stage and have music and concerts at the PERC, and have that one field available for outdoor seating. And so while we totally expect that the courts will be used as sports courts, most of the time we wanted to have that accessibility from the street, that it could be driven on, or at least accessed from the street. So for perhaps special opportunities or outdoor fairs. So that was the thought process. But having said that, I was just thinking today, or just recently, about needing to think through seating along the fields for the tournament. So that's a next site plan component.
Thank you.
Yep, I have a question. Thank you for the presentation, Carla. I'm curious, while this is some feasibility and some design stuff on this phase of the project, when will we see the other two phases presentations as well?
So at this point, phase 2 and 3 will be discussed in the feasibility study at a high level, but they will not be fully fleshed out as phase 1 will be. So we will finish the feasibility and a management plan for phase 1. We'll have the cost estimate for phase 1. Phase 2 and phase 3 will be maybe a city-led project, maybe a fully city project, and not necessarily a PFD project. At this point, we're unclear of the future of those two phases, but there's been a lot of work done on defining them through this process. And so we want to make sure that we speak to it. But at this point, what you will hear this year will be phase 1 only.
Okay. I may have some questions internally for us, because I do believe the ILA includes 20,000 square feet of classrooms, et cetera, for this feasibility study that we are under ILA for.
Okay.
So that may be an internal conversation.
Well, I appreciate that comment, and that will be something then that Dan and I can loop back with your executive director to speak to. So I think I appreciate you raising that question.
Carla and Dan, I have a question too. When you say turfed, is that artificial turf or is that grass?
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, that would be artificial turf, this synthetic grass.
Okay. And then with CK School District having the 7 fields, are they already looking at doing tournaments, and this would just expand their scope, or is this introducing them to do tournaments too?
My understanding is introducing them to market their fields in a more intentional way.
Got it. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
I did want to ask if Mr. Schoonmaker wanted to add anything to the presentation. He's the Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Poulsbo.
The only thing I want to add is field space is definitely what we need. I think the overall process we went through in coming to the conclusions that we look like we're going to for this phase 1 approach, I think we've learned a lot through this process. The thing I really like about the phase approach is the immediate need right now, not just for the City of Poulsbo, but I would say for the entire county, and trying to regain some tournaments like the Viking Cup, who, by the way, we just talked with North Kitsap Soccer Club about trying to get the Viking Cup back here, which precedes my time here in Poulsbo, but I understand was one of the larger tournaments in the area. or in the state, having the opportunity, having facilities like this is, not just for soccer, but lacrosse is a growing sport. Flag football, high school passing league tournaments, things like that. We just need more space for it. I think it's definitely going to be a draw. And although I love the concept that we presented earlier with all three phases wrapped into one, I think this kind of serves the need for where we are right now, and also kind of just sets us, creates the roadmap to get us to those other phases as the city expands and the need grows.
Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. And sounds like most of this stuff will be clear on the December 12th meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Thank you very, very much. It was very informative.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll move down to new business. Item A was the executive team was meeting with the Port of Bremerton. And Executive Director, you'd like to cover that?
Certainly, I'd be more than happy to. Last week, last Wednesday, we got together with the, well, first off, let me back up a little bit. Felt the need was, the time was now, and we probably should have done it sooner, but time was now for us to be able to speak with the Port of Bremerton to make sure that we're all on the same page, understanding the overall project, and then not only that, but understanding the ask for Circuit of the Northwest, and make sure that we're all on the same page. And so we felt it was important to bring our executive team together along with theirs and their legal counsel to kind of talk through all of these different things and look at the different aspects of it. I believe that both want to get to the right solution for the Circuit of the Northwest project. It's just how do we get there? And so we started that dialogue together. So the Port CEO, Mr. Jim Rothland, was in attendance. Port Commissioner Stracklejohn was there, and also legal counsel Ms. Ann Montgomery was there as well. And then our executive team, Chairman Hatchell, Vice Chairman Morrissey, and Treasurer Draper were in attendance along with our legal counsel, which was Mr. Brian Lawler and Mr. Martin Brenow. So we had some really good discussion and dialogue. We actually went over an hour in that discussion. And we want to talk about the truly understanding the funding request from Circuit of Northwest, although we had the presentations from them and so forth. Exactly what does that require in order to be able to meet that funding request? And things like, what are the legal requirements? What legally is the PFD required to do when we go to try to do something like this? How do we raise $20 million in bonding? Where do we go to do that? Is that something that the PFD tries to do, or is that something that we take to the county and ask the county to try to raise the $20 million bonds? Who's going to be the backer of a $20 million bond? Does it need to go before voters or not? What's the definition of RCW, and what does our legal counsel feel comfortable in being able to address to that? And then finally, who funds the debt service? In other words, if we were to secure $20 million right now, we can't just wait and pay the debt service until after an admissions tax is collected, if that's the direction we took. So who's going to pay the debt service? And trying to get answers to that as well. So during all of those periods of time that we had the dialogue that went back and forth, and the overall sense that I got from both sides is that we still have some homework to do. We still got to go back. I had asked specifically for the port to, number one, tell us exactly who the third party was that Circuit Northwest was speaking to with regard to paying the interest only on the debt service of a $20 million bond. So it would not come out of our current revenue. We knew previously from our financial advisors that they stated that in our current revenue stream with our monthly sales tax rebates, we would not be able to afford to pay our current obligations to the current projects along with our operating expenses and our debt service to our initial bond, our 2021B bond, and then also pay interest on a $20 million debt service. So we already knew that. So somebody else was going to have to pay for that, and who was that? So we asked the court to get a definition, get a clear picture of what that looked like. And then we also asked our legal counsel to give us their opinion on whether or not they felt that it needed to go before the vote, needed to go before the voters for a vote on the admissions tax. And I will let Mr. Lawler speak to that in just a second. And then the last thing that we asked them to go back and do was to tell us who do they think was going to be the backer of that $20 million bond. And so we got responses back from each one of those. That's something that I shared with the board. I forwarded to the board earlier today with what Mr. Rothland had sent to us. So the board had that to be able to review and what their responses were. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lawler because did I leave anything out in the conversation or to anybody else that happened to be there on the call? Is there anything else I'm missing in summary?
Not that I can think of. You covered it very well.
Okay. Mr. Lawler, did you have anything to add?
I can go into a little more detail on the legal analysis if that would be helpful. And I think the analysis changed or maybe got into more focus since the last time we talked to the board. So maybe it's worthwhile for me to take a minute or two.
Yeah, please do.
So members of the board, at the last meeting, we discussed that there was some potential ambiguity in the statute that might allow the KPFD to charge an admission tax fee. There was some wordsmithing going on. And the county PFD statute says that any tax imposed by the PFD must have voter approval other than the non-voted sales tax that the PFD has collected since its formation. But our bond counsel said there was some ambiguity there in the statute, and there's some other ways to look at it, and there might be some daylight in which it would be possible to impose some sort of admission fee, charge tax, or whatever, without going to voter approval. And one of the ideas we discussed was, given the uncertainty and given the risk that violating the statute could create some liability for the PFD if our advice was wrong, is we look into an idea of an attorney general opinion, get an opinion. While it's not binding on courts, it's very highly regarded, and courts will give great deference to what the attorney general says on an interpretation of a statute issue. So that's where we were, and I think where we are now is both myself and Mark Greenow at Foster Garvey have pretty much concluded that there really isn't daylight available, and the statutory requirement of going for voter approval is probably necessary and the prudent way to go. And going the other direction, then seeking an attorney general opinion probably, and it's going to take 14 to 18 months to do that, probably is not money or time well spent. And so I think the gist of our legal analysis is a voter approval would be required to impose an admission tax. That said, and I don't know if Mark's on the phone or not, Mark, who works with many PFDs across the state, said that there's a potential workaround. And Mark, are you on the call or on the meeting?
No, Mr. Lawler, he's not on.
Okay. Anyway, Mark explained there was a potential workaround. It sounded somewhat complicated, whereby the Circuit of the Northwest would lease the site to the PFD, which in turn would lease it back. but therefore, I guess the PFD would have some legal interest in the facility, such that maybe voter approval would not be required. And
Mr. Lawler, I misspoke. I'm sorry. Mr. Greenow is on. I've just promoted him to panelist.
Great. So maybe Mark can address the potential workaround issue and any further comments on my comments.
Thank you. So I think Mr. Lawler summarized this correctly. We have determined that if the PFD were to impose an admission tax, that voter approval would be required. There is the possibility, and this was suggested by the Circuits Northwest through the port, that instead of an admission tax, they would simply charge sufficient fees to pay to the PFD, included in the ticket price, the equivalent of the admission tax. And so then the tax, the same amount of revenue would come through the gate, but they would tag that amount as payable to the PFD for debt service on the bonds to be issued. And my question to their legal counsel was, if you can charge ticket prices sufficient to support the financing, then what's the purpose of inserting the PFD into the transaction? And I think what they're looking for is some sort of, some degree of credit backstop from PFD's sales tax revenues. And so after the meeting, we had some discussions as to, the ability and the comfort level of the PFD to put its sales tax revenue stream at risk in the event that the admission charges imposed by the facility were insufficient. And so those are the kinds of details that we'll be looking at. They're largely numbers driven as opposed to legal driven. So your financial advisor will probably be taking the lifting oar going forward on developing a model that makes financial sense. And that will be a prerequisite, of course, because before the PFD does anything, then the Department of Commerce is going to require a financial feasibility analysis that demonstrates the soundness of any type of proposal that the PFD proposes to undertake.
So I think to summarize my takeaway from that meeting, and I was in attendance, was there's basically three paths we can go down to see about the feasibility of moving forward with the PFD involved in this project. And I thought, and my comments were, I think we should be marching down all paths concurrently to see what we can and should do.
Yeah, I agree with that. One quick question for Brian, though. So do you concur that a feasibility study by Commerce is required for this, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I went back and reviewed the statute today. And if the PFD is taking on any indebtedness, it's mandatory to get the Department of Commerce independent feasibility analysis done.
Yeah, I agree with Director Morrissey. I think we should get started on this and see where we stand and what the feasibility study says. I mean, it's hard to consider the future without knowing if this is a feasible project or not.
On the third option, that where the Circuit of the Northwest would just include in their admission fees enough to pay us the say 5%, the equivalent of an admissions tax, whether or not that does or does not require a lease to the PFD and a lease back, or whether is that a critical part of it, or can we just conclude an agreement with the Circuit of the Northwest to give us 5% of their revenue?
My understanding, and we will look into this a little bit further, but for the PFD to expend any type of money or to issue any type of bonds, it has to have some either operation, ownership, or control of the facility. It can't do it just for what in this case would be a port facility because it's on port property. There has to be some type of ownership or operation interest for the PFD to legally be able to use both its sales tax revenues and its bonding capacity.
Since the port owns the property, could they conclude such a deal with Circuit of the Northwest, and then the the money then flow from Circuit of the Northwest to the port, and then from the port to the PFD?
Well, if the port could do the financing, then there's, again, no particular reason for the PFD to be involved, other than, if it wanted to, on a secondary basis, pledge certain of its sales tax revenues. There certainly would be no need for the PFD to issue the bonds. It could, if it chose to, provide some form of credit support, so long as the Port of Bremerton were involved. The port's authority to issue that type of financing is, and I'm not the port's bond counsel, obviously. I haven't looked completely into it, but it would, it probably could. Ports have pretty broad authority to participate in economic development type functions. If you can imagine a port running an industrial park, they have a fair amount of leeway to assist private enterprise to develop projects.
So for this to work, we would have to either own or operate a portion of this, correct, to do the bond?
Well, and I mean, the legal requirement is that you have some type of ownership or operation interest. The way that we would normally do this would be the port controls the land. They would sublease it to the PFD. The PFD would enter into an agreement back with the port that the port builds the facility and pays the fees necessary to support the debt service on the bonds. So it would be some kind of leaseback type arrangement where the port, at the end of the day, you're basically just providing financing, and the port would then obviously farm out all of its requirements to build and operate the facility largely to Circuits of the Northwest. So you'd be inserting yourself into the chain of ownership sufficient in a manner to permit you to do this legally, but on an operational day-to-day basis, you wouldn't have responsibility.
So can I ask a quick question, Mr. Greenhour, on how that's different from our current projects? We don't own any of the facilities that we've financed in the past.
Right. If you're working just with public entities, then it's a little easier because because then you're operating purely under the interlocal cooperation statute. So it might be possible to do it if the Port of Bremerton wanted to own the facility, but if they don't, then if the Port of Bremerton does not want to have some kind of active role in owning and operating this facility, then you would have to insert yourself somehow into it. And so that's just something that we'll be exploring over the next period of weeks.
And them owning the land, right? Because I believe they're only leasing a super long-term lease to Circuit of the Northwest. Doesn't fulfill that obligation?
It's just not, right now what you have is basically no interest at all in the facility. You don't have any type of ownership interest. You don't have any operational interest. And if the port has leased all of the property out to Circuits of the Northwest and they're the only people that are actually doing anything, then your connection to the project, even through the port, is pretty tenuous. Okay. And so, we'd want to look at that and make sure that whatever interest you have in the facility is sufficient to support your authority to both finance and just to participate in the project. And in the future, you may well want to be able to impose an admissions tax, and Circuits of the Northwest may want you to do that. So we wouldn't want you to enter into an arrangement in such a manner that would preclude that.
Thank you. I think my last comment on this is that it was alarming for me to learn. Again, I haven't been on this board super long, so I didn't know about city PFDs and the fact that city PFDs can charge an admissions tax without a vote of the people, and county PFDs are treated separately. So I think out of all this, after discussion, there's a motion coming from me to move forward on the 3 tracks as a facilities district. And I wouldn't mind raising my hand saying I would like to help lobby for the fair treatment between county and city PFDs.
So I have one more question. So for the ownership and operating portion of this, is that only if you do a bond based on the revenue of the tickets, not on the sales tax rebate, right? And that would be why it wouldn't apply to our other projects.
Revenue bond.
You
Right.
you can only spend your sales tax revenue on projects that you own or operate, either directly or through some type of interlocal arrangement with another entity that has the authority to do so.
Mark, at your meeting, were there discussions as to the level of revenue that would need to be collected to then cover the PFD's, interest? And I agree with John of let's proceed down all 3 tracks. My only real concern, there's obviously nuances, but is, it's all good and well to say we do this and the, Circuit of the Northwest collects enough revenue and covers our interest. But then the fundamental question is what happens if they don't collect enough revenue, as projected, for whatever reason, another shutdown, lockdown, or just the events aren't as lucrative as they project. Then we're
I think, sir, that you've put your finger on 90% of the work. Once the 10% of the legal framework is not terribly difficult to put into place, it's actually figuring out what the revenue stream is and what kind of financing it can support and what to do when things go sideways. And we had a fair amount of discussion on those points.
Okay.
Because we've seen, I've worked on PFD projects for over 20 years, and I've seen them, things, they take the first hit in a recession. And they have a very narrow revenue stream. So it's very hard to lever those revenues without some type of credit support. So that's why you're hearing all of the discussion about what do we do with the interest in the interim? What do we do about lining up sufficient credit support to make this an attractive package? Because it's easy to look down and say they'll contribute $30 million over the next 20 years. But you really have to perform a lot of sensitivity analysis on that and be aware that lenders are not going to give you dollar for dollar what you project. It's more like 50 cents on the dollar. And so that's why the importance of the feasibility analysis, because that will be a third-party independent consultant that comes in and performs an analysis on those projections and performs those types of sensitivity analyses and signs off on them in a manner that obviously is just a projection, but there's a reason that Commerce put that requirement into place after some of the facilities were having difficulty during the Great Recession.
Thanks.
More discussion on this?
Sure.
So I was just going to say, I don't know if we need a motion to move forward with all these items.
What I would like to do is have the executive director reach out to Commerce and start what we need to for the feasibility study. Get that going. So next meeting, perhaps you can come back. There's going to be a cost attached to it. I'm assuming there is for everything, timeline for it. And so we can get that started, see what that's going to be. And then we can move on to the other options. I guess the other part that kind of worries me is I'm not very big on a workaround on the law. I mean, it might work, but it doesn't seem to be in the spirit or the intent of the law for the vote of the people for this. So that's just my personal opinion on that. But if the board concurs, I say we have the executive director begin working with Commerce, have it ready for a feasibility study for the next meeting, and we can decide to move, who's going to pay for it, all that.
And I didn't mean to imply that this is some type of shady legal workaround. It's certainly
I did not
possible.
think that.
Yeah, no,
I didn't think that.
But I mean, it's certainly possible for you to engage in a revenue-based financing of a facility where there's no admission tax, where the owner and operator of the facility is paying to you sufficient debt service out of the revenues generated by the facility to meet the debt service requirements. It's not a workaround, really. It's just an alternative pathway that doesn't require the imposition of an admission tax.
So does that sound doable for you?
Yeah, I can certainly reach out to them. As a matter of fact, I've done a little bit of looking already to kind of see what that process looks like, and it's pretty straightforward. So most certainly, at the direction of the board, I'll be more than happy to do that.
And I don't know on the other ones that have been done, who paid for those?
Yeah, that'll be another question that I think that we're going to need to talk to the port about as well, is that we'll need to find out how much it costs, and then what the timeline is, what that looks like to have something like that done. The other thing too, though, is I think we've had a lot of discussion. It might be wise to have a formal motion and have a vote of the board for me to do that, and anything else that it is that we're going to move forward on.
Okay. Do I hear a motion?
So motioned.
Will you flesh the motion out a little bit more? So, because I'd like to go over the 3 different paths we're looking at and what we're directing them to do. So.
Yeah, so I think we should make a motion to move forward on all 3 tracks. 1, lobbying to have fair treatment between county and city tax collection, admission tax collection. 2, I'm drawing a blank on all 3 of them now, is the ability for, help me with the wording on this.
Feasibility study?
Yeah, that's not the wording I want though. What am I looking for?
You're talking about if.
So I think should we do them in 3 separate motions? It might be easier.
Yeah, it might be
I would
easier.
say so.
Yeah. So let's just stop right there.
Okay.
So I make that motion because I know that's the one I want to head up on behalf of the board.
So which one is that?
To lobby to have county PFDs have the same ability to exercise an admissions tax as a city PFD.
I'll second that.
Okay. Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Any nays? No. Okay, that motion passes. And do we have another motion?
I'll move for the executive director to pursue the cost and time or duration for a feasibility study, going back to commerce or whoever we need to do to figure that out and present it back to the board.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, but then I have a comment. I think before Russ can do that, doesn't our financial advisor have some more work to do on the initial numbers that we got from Circuit of the Northwest? I mean, we haven't really validated all those estimates, and I would think we would have to do some work on that before we can give a package to Commerce.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, we have our Northwest municipal advisors on as panelists. So I'm going to allow for both Mr. Neumeister and Mr. Bauer to speak to that.
And we're talking about just to get a proposal on the
Correct
study. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, this is Scott Bauer. And so I think, again, and I don't, we need a little bit of additional information on, who it would be issuing the bonds in order to say whether $1.8 million would be sufficient. So for instance, is that a general obligation of an issuer, not the PFD? So would it be a general obligation bond, for instance? Or is it only the PFD's credit that would be backing the revenue bond, in which case $1.8 million may not be sufficient to issue the bond. So I think it would be a little bit hand in hand here with some additional work, I guess, with the feasibility study and discussions on, again, who's financing it. Are there other revenues in addition to the admissions tax that would be pledged? One comment was the sales and use tax, but are there other project revenues that might be pledged as well? And then I guess just sort of when does the $1.8 million come into effect? Is that immediately? Is that several years from now? Does it ramp up to a certain amount? So I think we have some additional questions before we could really say, that the PFD could go and issue bonds secured only by that admissions tax.
So I'm a little lost. What's the $1.8 million from?
I believe in a presentation that was provided, there was an estimate of just shy of $1.8 million of admissions taxes, or maybe various taxes, that would be available to potentially pay debt service on a $20 million bond.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
So
1.8 annually.
Correct.
yeah. So if what we're looking at is basically a draft proposal number on what it costs to create the feasibility study, I understand that we definitely need to flesh out what the feasibility study will cover. Isn't step one, though, just to find out what it's going to cost, and we'll figure out who's paying for it and get it started? Yeah.
Yeah, I would assume that they would come back and verify all the numbers from us.
Right. That,
yeah.
Isn't that part of the feasibility study? But we still, I mean, is it $10,000 to do a feasibility study, or is it $100,000? That's kind of the question I'm looking at.
Right. And that's what with board's approval, that's what I'll go find out.
And I
And
do
then-
understand that we have rough information for them, then it's not going to be.
Right. And also part of that process, I'm going to ask them what is required for a feasibility study? What numbers are you looking for? What's the raw numbers? What data do we need to provide for you in order to be able to get this feasibility study out of the way? Because we know that, that whether it's us serving the bond or whether it's the county serving the bond, that you're still going to have to do a feasibility study. So the question is going to be asked by anybody.
Yeah, and they do these quite a bit. I'm sure they have everything ready to go, exactly what we need and everything.
Yeah, and I will also work with the port as well. So if we need to get additional data from Circuit of Northwest and what it is that they've been able to find and provide, then we can also pass that on. Okay, so that was
the discussion on the motion. Is there any more discussion on this motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I
Any nays? No. The motion carries for the feasibility study. And I don't remember what the third part of this was.
Actually, the third and now fourth parts. One is whether or not we want to proceed with the process to get an attorney general opinion in view of, one, the length of time it's likely to take, the cost we're likely to incur for legal fees in preparing it, and the fact that although it's reliable, it's not guaranteed, guaranteeing us against some action. That's one thing. And then the other thing is whether we want to proceed with any further planning on putting approval for the admissions tax on the ballot.
Yes, and that would be difficult to start planning that, I would think, until we have a timeline. If Commerce is going to take a year, I mean, I don't know what their timeline on these feasibility studies. I've looked at some online, what they've done for other PFDs, and they're pretty lengthy and detailed. I would assume they're going to.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we need to do anything on those last two things that I just reviewed, because it seems like the Attorney General opinion has some flaws in it. Mm-hmm. Time, cost, reliability, guarantees, and I think we're just not ready on the sales tax thing. I think I'm the only board member that was on here the only time we put another sales tax issue on the ballot, and it was not a pleasant experience.
You will have to tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I'm hopeful this would be better, because this is a tax on the people that actually would use the facilities versus everybody.
That's true, but there are folks out there who are kind of knee-jerk voters against any tax, even though they may never go out to see an event.
And and that's all the more reason to be very prepared for this if it does get presented to the voters.
So I think we've probably done all we can do for tonight.
Yes.
So I may just suggest that we give authorization for an AGO, go down that route, find out what it's going to cost us before pulling the trigger on it. I don't know that we need to do it, but I think, I like to train before I go into any sporting event, and to me, that's what it is.
Well, I know, speaking to our council, and I believe that Mr. Lawler had spoken to it as well, and Mr. Greenow both said that they did not feel that an AGO was worth, that it was the wrong path to take, or not the wrong path to take, but just not the path to take to go get an AGO. But please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Greenow or Mr. Lawler.
You are not wrong in your characterization. My personal belief is it would be a very steep hill to climb, and I think the prospects of success are not high.
Okay, so
I agree.
So I want to wrap this up to make sure I understand the motions and make sure that our next direction. The first one was lobby to have the county PFD with the authority to assess an admissions tax. And I know that in speaking with our legal counsel, I believe that Mr. Lawler can help me with that. Is that correct, Mr. Lawler?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then the second motion that was passed by the board was for me to speak with the Department of Commerce, determine what the cost is going to be, what the length of time that's going to take in order to be able to get the feasibility study completed. And then I can report back to the board on what that cost would be, and then the length of time it would take to do that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Director Bullock or Director Jagodinsky or Director Havers, did I misspeak? Are you all in agreement with what I just summed up?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
All right, thank you.
And the last thing, if possible, we have that by next meeting.
Yes.
We could maybe have the port or somebody from the port so we can discuss getting it started and paid for you fairly quickly.
Most certainly. What I would like to do is at the next meeting, we'll have it on the agenda. I would like to include the port in that discussion, if it's all right by the board. So Commissioner Shacklejohn or CEO Rothland or both, so they can also speak to it as well, and be part of this larger public conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we'll move down to new business B, which is the county commissioners meeting on July 27th.
Correct. And so we are meeting this Wednesday with the county commissioners. This is a follow-up meeting that we had with the commissioners back in March. Our board will be meeting. It's also open to the public as well to attend that meeting. And if you remember in the previous meeting, we had told the county that we would, our financial advisors go back. We got permission to do this, to go speak with Kitsap Bank and Key Bank to get a determination on what the rate would be to refund our current 2021 B bond to 2041. Because currently we are only bonded and funded through 2026. So they gave us permission to do that. So we were able to finally get that information back from the banks. So we weren't dragging our feet on it. Our financial advisors were really working hard to get that information. It just took the banks a long time to be able to get that. So we now have that information. We're going to report it back to the Board of County Commissioners along with the county treasurer, who will be in on the meeting as well. And we're going to go to them. We're going to ask them. We're going to present the numbers to them, and we're going to ask them if they are willing to refund the bond to 2041. And if they are not, then our board will make a decision as to moving forward for us to be able to do that on our own. The rate will be higher, so the debt service will be higher if that's the case. So that's why we prefer for the county to be able to do that as opposed to us to do that. But we are prepared to do that if necessary.
And
Russ, I have that on my calendar as a Zoom only meeting, or is it in person? I just want to make sure I didn't.
No, it's in person, Director Havers. It's in person, but there's also a Zoom link. So when I send that to you, you should have a Zoom link as well.
Okay.
That'll be at 10:30 this Wednesday in Port Blakely Conference Center at the County Admissions Building.
Okay, any more discussion on that item?
That's right up the hill.
Yes, sir. Just up the hill.
Okay, then we'll move on to 6A, financial report.
Actually, we need to go to C, which is not on here, and that is we pulled out the blanket voucher 20 July 2022 for operating expenses.
Yes.
Just as a quick review on it, we've got a duplication in there, so we can drop the first Comcast bill.
Yes, for Comcast.
First Comcast bill, that $554 plus change one is just eliminated. It's already taken care of in the second Comcast bill holds.
Right. So I had a discussion earlier today with Director Leadham, and so I will pull that out of the operating expenses. Other than that, the voucher should be good, with the exception of retracting the expense to Comcast.
So we'll need a motion on that, I'm assuming.
Yes.
I'll move to approve it.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any
Aye.
nays? Nope. Okay, the motion passed.
All right.
Okay, now we can move down to 6A.
Correct. And we have our accountant, Ms. Veach, with us, and she's going to speak to our financial report for May and June. If you'll recall, last month we did not have one to report out on. So we are now reporting up for May and June, so we can get up to date. Okay, Ms. Veach, I'll turn it over to you. We have the summary P&L statement for May, and then the next slide when you're ready to move for me to move it to will be for June.
Sorry about that. The mute was there. Thank you so much. So we do have just the summary financial statements. Oh, it looks like we have the balance sheet here that we're looking at for the month of May. The balances are all in keeping with what we have anticipated along the way. June is going to show us more where we are right now as of the end of May. Everything reflected the blanket vouchers that had been approved and the expenditures that were already discussed, and it's just reflected in the amounts down below here. If you go down to the next one, which is it should probably be, this is the June balance sheet as well. So you can see that everything is in line with the information that we've been giving all along. The reports from the county are still presenting a little bit of a transactional challenge between the different funds that we're correcting by doing our own balance sheet and income statement on a parallel system right now that it will have to compare in the future. But everything is right in line with what our budget is, what the blanket vouchers have been approved, and the money that Russ has been able to shift between the different funds. The 286 and the 968 and 977. 977 is our, let me go back to our definitional things on those just for a moment. I apologize. I'm drawing a blank on something. So the 968 fund is where we pay all of our operational expenses out of. And the 977 is more the gross funds and all of the projects, the PERC, all of the different projects that we're doing right now, all the capital outlays are part of that fund. And then the 286, correct me if I'm wrong, Russ, but it has to do with the bonding and the funds that are invested.
That's correct.
Okay, and if we go on down then to.
Those are the only two that we have.
Oh, okay, so we did the balance sheet instead of the profit and loss.
Correct.
So I apologize. I had my remarks prepared for the profit and loss rather than the balance sheet. But everything that was spent in the 977 had to do with our all the funds that we've been working on, the ones that you've been discussing, and everything in the 968 is just our regular operational funds from the blanket vouchers.
So Susan, our disposable income to pay project invoices is the 2.919 million in 977. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
That's correct. I can tell you that Ms. Beach and I have worked really, really hard to get these finally squared away with how the county is reporting our balance sheets and so forth. So we're finally at that point. It's taken us a long while. One more step that we're going to take is the QuickBooks Online, where we're going to literally live. As I make a payment, I'll go into QuickBooks Online and I'll make that payment. So then we've got one more check and balance for ourselves. The last thing I'll say is take note of the 19,319.29 and the 968, the operating expenses, because on the next report, which is our rebate summary sheet, you can see that in May, let me move this here. There we go. In June, we received $190,292.70. That's up 7.3% from the same time this past year. Our debt service is set at $66,337. That's what it is each month. Then you can see the figure that I quoted, the 19,319, as our expenses for 968 is represented there. So the net gain for the month of June was $104,636.24. And then you can see the average so far this year is $182,974 that we're receiving in monthly sales tax rebates. And to date, we've received just over $1 million now.
So Russ, that 104,000 net gain, that ends up in the 977.
That's correct. That's correct.
And then I know you don't have the income statements up here, but they were in an earlier email that I saw, so I printed them, but they were year to date. So will we be getting monthly ones so we can look at 1 month at a time?
You will, and that was my mistake. I had extracted those out because I didn't mean to. That was my fault.
Okay.
But as a matter of fact, tomorrow morning I'll send the board the full financial statements so you can see them, the expenses and the revenue. No, my mistake. And then the last financial report is, and that may be a little tough to read on the screen. Let me see if I can zoom in. There we go. What's highlighted for the month are invoices that came in from the projects. So the PERC project, an invoice of $297.50 for the Port Gamble project. We received 2 invoices, one in the amount of $159,566.82 and the other for $1,219.86. Those were part of the blanket vouchers as part of the consent agenda. And then we also had an invoice from the Port of Bremerton for $69,194.14. So I just highlighted those to show you what it was that was approved tonight to be paid. I want to I want to speak to Mr. Thompson and Miss Rogers from Barker Creek Consulting. They're the best, and we have a really good working relationship where we have a meeting where we get these invoices. We go through them, and we go through them to make sure that they're accurate. An example of that is that the original invoices that we gotten from the county for the Port Gamble project were significantly higher than these. And we found that they were asking for reimbursements for things that were not in accordance with the ILA. So we went back to, I had the questions and the comments. I went back to the county and said, in accordance with the ILA, we cannot reimburse for those expenses. They made the corrections. They sent us the corrected invoices. And so what you're seeing is corrected invoices from what was originally sent. And quite honestly, that wouldn't happen without having the Barker Creek Consulting working with me alongside to be able to find those things. So I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the two of them. They're both panelists. And if either one of you would like to speak to this journey that we've been taking on doing a really close eye on these invoices, please do. Okay, I guess not. Oh, I'm sorry. Shannon. Hang on just a second. Go ahead, Mr. Thompson. I'm
sorry, I
about
couldn't raise my hand, couldn't chat, so I was just waving out here in the wind. So no, thank you very much for all of that compliment. We very much enjoy working with Russ, and we go through these invoices and we go back into the ILAs to make sure that we're being charged for what we should be being charged for. And as we start to see progress on the building of these things, we'll start to correlate some of that into the buildings also, just to make sure that the public funds are being utilized appropriately. So anyway, we appreciate the opportunity, and we'll keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Anything?
Yeah, I have a question, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Russ, refresh my memory on the Port of Bremerton project with Circuit of the Northwest. Are we actually paying these invoices? I have in my mind that we agreed like on 1.4 million and we're giving them so much a month for the next year. So are these invoices really relevant?
So the way it works is that it was a $1.4 million agreement stretched out over 10 years. So February 1st of every year, and this was the first year we did this, we issued $144,000 to the port. So all this is us going through the invoices that are submitted for Circuit Northwest, going back to the port and saying, those are valid invoices. They meet the requirements that are asked. And then they then go and reimburse, but we are not turning around. And
so this 69,000, the port actually paid that.
That is correct. That is correct.
And I think as a moment of clarity, I don't believe we did the full 144,000 because we didn't have enough invoices to back that. I believe the payment to them was, actually it should be on here. Oh, it says 144. Don't I remember that it was less than 144?
I should remember that too.
For each year?
For what?
Yes.
Oh, anybody?
Yeah, February 1, we sent a payment of $144,000.
Wow. Why?
And we'll do that February 1.
I remember arguing that it
9
should.
years.
Okay. All right. Apparently I won that argument and I don't remember. Okay. Thank you.
Nice job, Aaron.
Yeah.
Anything else on the financial reports?
No.
Okay. We'll move down to ongoing business. Good of the order. Nothing?
I might ask for an executive session post this.
Absolutely.
Make a motion to move into executive session to discuss potential litigation.
Okay.
Do we need a motion for that, or we just?
Right.
That was my
motion
okay.
in a second to go into executive session.
For the executive session.
Okay. All right.
Discussion?
Just how much time do we want to let everyone know?
How much? I don't know what this.
You're pulling it.
It's not going to take me long.
15 minutes.
15 minutes.
And will we get a separate Zoom link there, John?
Oh.
Or Russ?
I'm not the Zoom administrator, so I can't answer that question.
Or Russ, for those of us.
Yeah.
So do you need me to step out?
No, I want you as part of that.
Yeah.
No.
I want a conversation with our legal counsel.
Okay.
But you're going to have to create a new Zoom for our Zoom attendees.
Do you want to talk to just our legal counsel with just you and him? And then you guys can brief forward. We can schedule another executive meeting, or do you want to do it with all of us in there?
Sounds like it's easier for me to just have a one-off with Brian and team. So,
okay. So, would you like for me to set up a call with the?
No, I can do that on my own. I'm
counsel?
just doing it on my own.
Okay.
I mean, does that sound good to the rest of the board?
Sure. And then we have an executive session
yes.
where we get briefed. Okay.
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay.
The joys of Zoom.
I know. If we knew how to quickly throw.
Well, there's going to be no motion at the end of it, so that's why I didn't know if we could just dismiss the rest of Zoom and say that there's going to be no motion coming out of this executive session.
I don't think we can do a motion out of executive meeting.
I believe what we could do, but Mr. Lawler, correct me if I'm wrong. We could end this meeting, and then we could keep the Zoom up for just the board for the executive meeting.
So after an executive session, you have
Yeah.
to go back to your original meeting,
Yeah.
even if you have no business, but then conclude the meeting. So, so we can't really conclude this main meeting and then have another meeting that's
Right, so we've got to use.
And
Yeah.
doesn't someone have to stay in this meeting during the executive session?
The person who holds the Zoom account.
Yes.
I'll have a one-off conversation with
Yeah.
Brian, and we'll have another catch up for the rest of the board.
All right. And then Mr. Lawler, I'll work with you since this new world of Zoom, how it is that we
Got to vote it down.
pause a meeting and then be able to go into executive session. If that means that we set another Zoom link out for executive session.
correct. That's what we've done in the past.
Okay.
And then it's also helpful if we put on the agenda that we're going to have an executive in the future.
Yeah, I didn't know until tonight, but thank you.
Right.
And I think there's a motion that we got to vote down then.
If it's not seconded, it just dies.
Yeah, it's second.
Oh, did it?
Recall them or whatever you do.
Or you
Yeah.
can withdraw it.
Just we'll vote it down.
You can recall your motion.
Okay, I'll recall my motion.
I believe, does that work?
Yes.
And then I don't know if we can, but could we do the executive session maybe Wednesday, right after or right before our other meeting we have scheduled?
Oh, you want to have an executive session prior to us meeting with the county
Would
commissioners?
that work for you?
It does not have to be prior to, it could be after.
Okay,
I mean,
Sure.
everyone's going to be on there either in Zoom or whatever then.
sure. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll plan on that then. Okay, any other ongoing business? No? Okay, the meeting is adjourned at 6:51 PM.
Thank you, everyone.